How will your child survive school with low literacy? Are they in an intervention program and still struggling? Are you feeling panicked about your child's future? Do you ever question how will they survive in school? How will they survive in life? Well, Lois Letchford has stood in your shoes. Her young son, Nicholas, failed first grade. The prognosis was dire. Replacing the despair, Lois took on his teaching to find her son was not slow. Nicholas went from failing first grade to a Ph.D. from Oxford. Wow, you do not want to miss this interview.
Have you ever felt like giving up, quitting, throwing in the towel? Welcome to Never Ever Give Up Hope featuring Carol Graham. She's an author, health coach, and motivational speaker. Backed into a corner multiple times in her life, Carol shares with you stories on how she overcame some of the toughest obstacles a person can go through in life, but refused to give up hope. Rather than admit defeat, an opportunity was presented, and it involves each and every one of you. Carol will feature spectacular guests who will share their messages of hope, encouragement, and their inspiration to prove why life's adversities only make you stronger. And now, welcoming the host of the show, here's Carol Graham.
Lois Letchford's dyslexia came to light at the age of 39 when she faced teaching her son, Nicholas. Examining her reading failure caused her to adapt and change lessons. The results were dramatic. Lois qualified as a reading specialist using her non-traditional background, multi-continental experience, and a passion for assisting other failing students. Welcome, Lois.
Thank you, Carol. I am delighted to be here.
I related to your story because when my son, who we adopted and did not know he had fetal alcohol until he was 7 years old and in school, and realized that he had a severe learning disability. And back in those days when they ostracized some of these kids, I ended up pulling him out of school in first grade and decided to do homeschool. I knew nothing. So I can relate on that level, but your story, you had a background in education, and I am thrilled to hear that your story as I read it is as exciting, and I'm anxious because I know that other people are going to be helped by this. And there are many people who have been in your shoes. And I sincerely appreciate you being here today. So let's start with your story. Share your struggle with dyslexia to begin with.
As you said, I only put a name to it when I was 39.
Wow.
I clearly remember struggling really in reading throughout my education, and I didn't know it. All I knew was that it took a lot of work. What I recognized was that I could read words I could not comprehend, and that background helped me when I came to Nicholas, who couldn't decode or comprehend.
Interesting.
And as I started to work with him and started to do some reading, I realized that when you decode and all you're doing is decoding, we're not teaching children how to search for meaning. And secondly, abstract words are much harder to learn and find the meaning than concrete words. And when I say abstract words, I'm talking about the sight words, the little words that make the sentence and change the prepositions in front of, behind, before, beside them. All of those things make a difference. Simple words like then and than that even some skilled readers muddle up. And the big one are pronouns. because pronouns are easy to decode, but the meaning doesn't lie in the word. The meaning lies in the context of the sentence. And I didn't know any of those things. All I knew was that when I was reading a book, I created a stick figure. I could tell you the main characters. I could tell you what went on, and that was about it. The detail that skilled readers create. Skilled readers create Rembrandts when they're reading. I could only create the bare minimum.
Now, is that normal with dyslexia?
Not always. Sometimes there's an absolute struggle in decoding, and there's a struggle in decoding and creating meaning. So dyslexia varies per child. It varies on the conditions and on the genetic makeup of the child. And then the biggest one, it depends on how the child has been taught. Reading was always a struggle. My one big bonus was that my mother pushed for my education. And so I started elementary school in a low socioeconomic area. When I was in 8th grade, my older sister went on to 11th grade at another school, because our school finished at 10th grade at the time. This is in the 1970s. And my sister said, "Mum, Lois has to go here now," so that I could do grade 8, 9, 10, 11 and 12 in the one school. Moving to that school changed my life, because you are with a stream of people who have direction. At my other school, the only thing that they were aiming for was to leave school and work on the farm. And when I went to the school, and it was called Lockyer District High School in Australia, other people were learning. I worked harder to achieve my goals, and I knew I always worked hard, but here I really worked much harder, and I had to work hard to comprehend. And I remember thinking, as we're doing history, what do words mean, and what does the word imperialist mean? And with that, then I had to do some searching. I was never a good student, and that impacts my self-esteem. You're right, it impacts relationships.
Yes.
I was reluctant to reach out to a lot of other people because I really felt unworthy at that stage. I had enough of a score to go to teachers' college at the time, and I did physical education, and I scraped my way through that. But what was interesting was how I was taught. I had to do anatomy and physiology as part of the course. The first time I did anatomy, it was words, 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 and they went right over the top of my head, and I couldn't learn anything. I had to repeat that subject, and this time the professor brought in a box of bones. And instead of the words being abstract, he had a bone in front of me, pointed out all of the compartments of a bone, all of the areas of the bone. And my mind goes, "Oh, this makes sense." And I could do it. And that activity became a real learning point for me as a teacher. Because when I went to teach my son and my son failed, what did I go back to? Where I had succeeded. And when you're touching things, you're taking away the ambiguities of language. Okay, then I become a teacher, and I'm talking to you now. Language, by its very nature, is abstract. And the way we teach the letters and the sounds and all the parts, we just expect children to get it. Skilled readers, those who don't have any language problems, do get it with ease. So when these children who struggle come along, the teachers are lost. They don't have a clue. So it really helped me. My physical education degree helped me, and my learning disability helped me when my son came along and failed. There's a few things. Yes, the prognosis was absolutely dire. The first component, or the first part I'd like to comment on, was that my son had ear infections from the ages of 8 to 18 months. No one said to me, when a child has ear infections, it impacts the input on their brain. They cannot hear language, or they don't hear it clearly. It's distorted. And it's distorted before they have the ear infection, or before the ear infection is diagnosed, and after the ear infection is diagnosed. So their hearing, thus their brain is changed from not hearing. That's the first part. They're not getting the language that you would expect a child to have. So when my son goes into first grade, and I asked the teacher, I said, how's he getting on? And the teacher looked at me, she threw up her hands and said, well, I don't know how I'm going to teach him this year. He's so far behind, all he does is stare into space. And how now? I wish I had taken my son out of school, out of that hostile environment immediately.
Yes.
I didn't. I let him fail. Not one person from that school ever spoke to me and said, the way we're treating this child is not acceptable. And why did they treat him appallingly? He's dumb. He wouldn't know.
Yeah.
Well, guess what? He's 36 now. He's not dumb. He did know. And that experience from first grade is still with him.
Really? Wow.
Yes.
What an impact it made, man.
And he's had therapy over it. He's talked to me, 3 weeks ago, and he said, I didn't understand why the other children wouldn't play with me. He was isolated. The teacher isolated him, and then every child isolated him. Horrific. No one should have to do that.
Did you have support from any other place? I mean, you didn't have it within the school system, but were other people recognizing, what you were going through and supporting you and helping you, or was this a lone journey for you?
It really was a lone journey. My parents, my in-laws all supported me. But it's a very lonely journey because no one in the school is really being honest with you. And all they see is a child who can't do.
Right.
My son bit his fingernails, he wet his pants, and he did stare into space. So at the end of first grade, he could read 10 words. The testing revealed he had no strengths. And then they said, on that basis of one test that is language-based, which my child couldn't do, he's not very smart. That whole process of identifying to get funding can be, and for my son was disastrous. They didn't believe in him. The school did not believe in my child. They didn't find any other way. And then you've got this child who's really low with language, and they teach him the way they teach every other child.
Right.
And guess what?
Right.
He doesn't get it.
So how did you recognize that there was possibly another way of teaching? And at what point did you pull him out of school, and did you throw your hands up in the air and say, what am I going to do now? Or did you already formulated some type of plan?
This is fascinating about my story to me. My husband is a professor, and in 1995, his second year of school, my husband had study leave back in his university that did his P.H.D, back in Oxford University. So for 6 months, our family is going overseas. It's a natural break from the school system. So that's the first part. And I go with a series of books called Success for All that have got isolated words on the page, read the word, decode it, and just go on and say it, and then go through it, and we get to the end of the page, and I look back at the first word, and my Nicholas looks at me, and everything is gone. There's nothing sticking. That's when my mother-in-law was with me, and she said, Lois, put away what's not working and make learning fun.
Good, wise woman.
Incredible woman, incredible. And at that point, I needed input because I was in the depths of despair. I didn't know what to do. And her words allowed me to throw it away. It's not working. And okay, what can he do? And I recognised my son had two strengths. One was that he could see patterns, and the second, I've now forgotten, he could see patterns easily. So what I did with that was that I wrote a little poem, one little poem, and it was transformative. I didn't expect him to read anything. I read it to him. We read it together. We found the rhyming words. We played the games. He illustrated the poem. And because one poem worked, I went to another and another. And instead of his shoulders being up near his ears and panicked and his muscles being really tight, he's relaxed. He's laughing. I'm laughing. And we're enjoying it. That was transformative. And because, as I said, one poem worked, you go to another and another and another. And then the double O's come up. So I'm working through short vowels, and I just wrote poems for him. And double O comes up, as in the words cook, look and book. And I wrote a poem about the last of the great explorers, Captain James Cook. Simple poem. Captain Cook had a notion, there's a gap in the map in the great big ocean. He took a look without the help of any book, hoping to find a quiet little nook. That simple poem led us to asking lots of questions. I didn't know I'd tapped into Nicholas's curiosity. It required not only reading the poem, but then looking at maps. And everywhere we went in Oxford, there were map shops. So then we could say, was this before Cook or after Cook? And questions started to come. And learning went from our little classroom to everywhere we went in Oxford and built up a timeline of world history. While we're doing this, Nicholas said to me, can I see Captain Cook's original maps? And my mind exploded.
No kidding.
And I knew that question didn't come from a child with a low IQ.
Exactly.
And the next question he asked to me was, who came before Captain Cook? And I, smarty pants here, Mother says, well, that was easy, Nicholas. That was Christopher Columbus. And he shoots back, and who came before Columbus? My mind is blown because I know Nicholas has enormous struggles getting thoughts to words and out of his mouth. And I realise that he has done this huge amount of thinking and asked this question that doesn't come from a child who's 7 years old. This comes from a brain that is entirely different. And what it caused me to do was do the research. If I read anything to Nicholas, the words came out too quickly and I lost him. So I had to do the research, turn the research into a poem, then read the poem to Nicholas. Then we could discuss the history.
Oh my word, that's a double whammy of work, right?
It was huge. And so my mind is working, 24 hours a day to try and
Right.
produce a poem that I could work with Nicholas. It was transformative.
So did you pull him out of school at what point, and did he ever go back?
Well, this was the second half of 1995. In grade 2, we pulled him out of school because that was the time that my husband's study leave was.
Okay.
Right. He did go back. He went back to school the next year and he repeated second grade. So he had the same teacher as the prior year. In 1996, he goes back to school and he repeats second grade, so he's got the same teacher. One day I happened to visit school and I saw the diagnostician who had done the testing with Nicholas. And here's me, I'm excited. I am so pleased at all that Nicholas has learned. And I say this to her. She's standing in front of me. She puts her hands on her hips and says, well, I've spoken with the reading teacher and he's gone backwards. And in fact,
Wow.
he's the worst child I've seen in 20 years of teaching. And I still struggle to say that.
Of course. It's emotional.
Yes.
Absolutely. So, what was your response?
My response, I don't think quickly. I would have an auditory processing disorder as well. So I just walk away. I walked away and I talked to another friend for hours. And I went back to school to her and I said, you can call him whatever you like. But if he is the worst child you've seen in 20 years of teaching, don't expect him to learn like everybody else. That was a critical pinpoint moment in his life and mine. And then this is what happened next. That afternoon, he comes home with sentences to learn the sight words. You know, these little words that are challenging to learn, the abstract ones. And he comes home with the word saw, S-A-W. And he has 2 sentences and he reads them to me. He's standing really tense, holding this precious piece of paper. And he reads, I saw a cat. And he goes, no, shakes his head, no. And then, I was a cat. No, he said. And then it's, I had a cat and I assert a cat. And he just stopped and handed me the paper. I read the sentences and I read, I saw a cat climb up a tree. And the second sentence was even better. I saw a man rob a bank. It took me a little while to work out what was so bad and what was so wrong with these sentences. And the first was that the word saw has 3 meanings. The first meaning is the object, the saw. The second is to cut. And the third meaning is the abstract meaning of the past tense word to see. The teacher has only provided the abstract meaning of the word saw, and she has failed to give him a complete example of how the written language works. So when my son read, I saw a cat, or I saw a cat, and he stopped, he's searching for meaning, and he cut the cat in half. And he said, this doesn't make any sense.
Wow.
Which is why he went back and reread the sentence. And none of it made any sense. And the part that really made me upset was that you then have to ask the question, has the child seen a cat up a tree? My son had spent 6 months in another country looking and seeing amazing things about our world, and the teacher chose to use a standard sentence which he had never seen. And then when he couldn't do it, she'd turn around and say, well, he can't do it because he's not very smart. Instead of saying, what do I have to do to teach this child to learn to read?
Talk about stepping out of your comfort zone. My goodness, you had to relearn and figure out. Oh my goodness, I am so impressed. So, continue. What happened next?
Because Nicholas was in school, he was working well in school. If he came home and didn't understand anything, the child cannot say to you, this doesn't make any sense. All they can do is shut down, and I could see something wouldn't work. So I then would realize, oh, he can't do this. Okay, what do I have to do to help him do it? And oftentimes, at the time I was a stay-at-home mother, I would spend 24 hours on an activity so that if he came home on Monday with something he didn't understand, I would have an activity ready for him for Tuesday afternoon. It took an enormous amount of effort on my part to make sure he was getting everything that he needed in school. It wasn't long, 3 or 4 months later, he picked up a book, and at 5 o'clock in the morning, he's sitting, dressed for school, in his school uniform, on the couch, and reading the book that we had read the last year. And for me to see that and hear that was just amazing. And he got it. So from there on, it was just step after step after step of doing it. What happened to me was, because of this experience, I learned not to trust the reading teacher. And I went back and became, instead of a physical education teacher, I switched my degree to become a literacy teacher. My experience of teaching Nicholas was so powerful, and I started to read everything I could, and I realised what I had done was right and was in the literature. And the paper that still sticks with me today was called Beyond the Deficit Theory by an Australian professor called Brian Campbell, and published in 1990, before Nicholas went to school. And it said, when children fail to learn to read, the first thing we do is blame the child. We look at the testing and say, well, look at their IQ, look at their home background, look at this, look at that, look at why they're failing, instead of how does our teaching impact the child?
Yes.
Are we giving? And the first thing it said was, we give incomplete examples of how the written language works. What happened to my son? And that paper blew me away. Everything I have read, just adds to my knowledge. So I've read over 1,000 academic papers now.
This is innovation at its best, right?
And it's connecting academic literature with practical words.
Yes.
Take a break.
I'm hearing that as you're talking, and I'm absolutely so impressed. We're going to take a very short break, and when we come back, I want you to share your memoir and anything else you would like to encourage the listeners who may be going through something similar. We'll be right back.
Carol Graham would like to show you the path from misery to miraculous triumph in her fast-paced memoir, Battered Hope. She relates her determination to succeed as someone who experienced one horrendous nightmare after another. Gang raped and left for dead, loss of a child, husband falsely imprisoned, and cancer. Nothing could break her tenacity or faith. No matter what you face, heartache, loss, suffering, or injustice, Carol will illustrate how she became a victor the same way you can. The secret is to never, ever give up hope. Order your copy at Amazon or batteredhope.blogspot.com.
My book tells the story of my journey to reading and my son's journey. What's interesting about my son's journey to me is the extreme privilege we had to help him go from the bottom to the top. And how if we had stayed in our hometown and never left, my son would not be where he is today. And I say that because my son was always seen as a child with a learning disability. That's all they could see. And we lived on 3 continents to have him succeed. And each continent made a contribution that wasn't available somewhere else. Nicholas was born and went to school in Brisbane, Australia, and that's where our first failure happened. And once he read, he's still behind, but he's doing well. According to them, he's doing really well in school. When he was in 5th grade in 1999, we moved to Lubbock, Texas. Now, Lubbock is in the middle of nowhere in Texas. And Nicholas, in that scenario, went from the bottom of the class to the top. So, in Lubbock, it was a mindset shift more than anything. And in my book, I identify 9 factors that helped him go from the bottom to the top. And the one I would love to tell parents about is that happened by accident, was that living in Lubbock, you do a lot of driving. And I spoke to the librarian one day and said, what do I do? The boys are in the car and they fight. She said, listen to books on CD. It was transformative for multiple reasons.
Yes.
But if you've got a child who's behind, they need to hear the language.
Yes.
Before they can read it. and they need to hear it at the speed of the skilled readers. And that's what we did. The listening in itself helped him in the classroom, it helps him at home, and the amount of listening and reading Nicholas did was equivalent to the best child in the classroom reading.
Was Mama proud?
I was amazed. I was amazed at his dedication and his discipline and his ability to say, this is me, this is what I do, and turn his head on everyone else. It doesn't matter. This is what I do. He's worked like he's been doing a P.H.D. since he was 11.
Huh.
So that was, transformative. And Lubbock, for me, allowed me to teach. I was teaching there when I met a mother whose 13-year-old son was non-reading and spent 4 years in a phonics-only reading program. And I said, I think I know what to do. There's more involved in reading than just teaching decoding.
Mm-hmm.
And the school district paid for me to teach him over the summer. By the end of the summer, he was reading. And the mother wrote to the school district and said, you employ this woman or I sue you. I got employed. And I worked with him for 3 years, and he ended up graduating high school and graduating college with an honours degree in communication. Nicholas's story was extraordinary, and that he graduated high school. We went back to Australia for him to do his undergraduate degree. He started in engineering and kept slipping to doing more and more mathematics because the two fields worked together. And he ended up, after 5.5 years, having an honours degree in engineering and an honours degree in mathematics. And the following year, he had a scholarship to do a P.H.D. in applied mathematics from Oxford University, which is what he did.
So is your book Reversed a memoir, his story or your story?
Good question. It's my story. It's about me and how I got there, but it's also how I taught Nicholas and how I learned from him so much more than I could have learned myself.
Exactly. Yes.
The book ends when Nicholas completes his P.H.D. So we know he did well. I spoke to Nicholas after that, and now I've got this confident, articulate young man who feels he can take on the world. There's ups and downs, and there always will be, but he's confident. And I said to him, Nicholas, can you tell me what happened in first grade? I don't know. My son cried. His tongue went around and around in his mouth, and not one word came out. And it was the first time I'd recognised that he had been traumatised in school and I hadn't dealt with it. And I thought, I can't do anything about this now, but I said to him, Nicholas, can you tell me what happened when you and I learned together? And this is nearly 30 years ago when I was talking to him. And he said, 25 years ago, sorry. And he said to me, I remember the poems you wrote. You wrote Mug of a Bug and Windmill on a Hill. And then he said, you taught me about Captain Cook, and learning about Captain Cook and the explorers taught me to love learning, and I never want to stop learning. And then he started giggling. And he said, he's giggling like a 7-year-old, you wrote a poem about a witch's spell. And it was just so hilarious. It was so funny. And we had ingredients from everywhere, I think. And now I'm blown away because I didn't put that last poem into the book because I deemed the poem too bad. And what I'm learning is there is an emotional connection to learning that lasts a lifetime. We think literacy is about learning letters and sounds. And yes, we do have to do that. My question is, how are we doing it? Are we doing it in a way that is so traumatic that we leave children scarred for life? Or are we doing it in a way where emotions connect with learning and we set them up for a lifetime of learning.
Now, you do private tutoring as well. Is it strictly, is it online or is it strictly one-on-one?
It's online. I do one-on-one because I find it most effective.
Mm-hmm.
And I've found amazingly that online tutoring works. However, let me put a little cravat to that. When children are low, you cannot expect them to deal with the computer and deal with objects, which is what I do. I send and expect them to get it. You know, if the parent is sitting beside the child, that helps enormously. And then I'm helping the parent and the child.
Right.
And that's the critical step. And then once they get it, once they get more confident, then yes, then we can put them on their own. And I have been surprised at how effective online tutoring has been. And I had a 16-year-old come to me whose parents had spent $100,000. He had spent 4 years in a school for dyslexic children. And he came out non-reading. And I have a YouTube channel, and you can hear him reading poems that he would never have done 2 or 3 months prior.
Wow.
So I'm really pleased with what I've been able to do with online tutoring, and I just love it because I adapt whatever I'm doing to meet the needs of the child. It's not standardized.
Well, if any of the people in the audience would like to contact you, and that will be available, I'm assuming?
Through my website,
okay,
which is loisletchford.com is the best way, or email me or contact me through your podcast. Yes.
Excellent. This has been educational. All of us listening have learned something today, and you are a very good teacher. You are very clear, and I appreciate that so much. So is there anything in conclusion that you would like to add in any area? Word of encouragement or anything you would like to add?
We think literacy is, as I said, about learning letters and sounds, and that's it. There's more involved. And the first is that we have to get a child's attention. And secondly, we have to create active learners, children who are wanting to do it. You cannot inject learning into anybody. Irrespective of whether you're learning to read or you're being a surgeon, learning happens within the child, within the person. So they are the two things we have to create. We have to create conditions that allow our children to learn. And that's really what I do.
Thank you. That is an excellent summary. And thank you so much, Lois, for what you shared with us today. You have been encouraging and definitely motivating, and I appreciate you being on Never Ever Give Up Hope.
And I just love the title of your podcast.
Thank you, and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Never Ever Give Up Hope, featuring Carol Graham. Did you know that most people succeed because they are determined to? Quitting was never an option. Carol loves your comments and will respond to each one. So please subscribe and review this podcast. A rating of 5 stars would be outstanding and appreciated. Remember, if you are still here, there is always hope.